Morning. I'm always impressed when I see you come into the room, veganista, because I know that it's really early in the morning for you. It's early in the morning for you. You're 3 hours behind. You're on the West Coast, yeah? Also, can you hear me? I'm asking. I've had some issues with this mic. I had some did some hangouts with my students and they weren't able to hear me. I had to leave and come back. That's great. Great, great, great. So today's the day. Today is the last day. We're finally going to bring to a close our group discussion of pedagogy of the oppressed. So we're going to do this. We're going to get this done today. If we have, if we had nobody in the room today, we would be getting this done today. It's not that I'm in this all the time because I'm working on the pedagogy and the theater of the oppressed conference. So right now I'm one of the people reviewing proposals for workshops and panels and discussions. And so I've just been so immersed in the world of pedagogy of the oppressed, and I will continue to be immersed in the world of pedagogy of the oppressed probably for the rest of my life because I teach this course, because I teach a course that's, based on the fundamentals of this book and theater of the oppressed. And obviously I'm going to try to remain a member in good standing of the organization. Hey, Kearney, welcome. Good morning. Going to try to remain a member in good standing of that organization. So just talking a little bit about just getting people set up. So I'm hoping people are coming in. I hope everybody's comfortable. Hope everybody has everything that they need. Fell upon my hands yesterday by chance. Pedagogy, are you trying to tell me that you were like walking down the street and like a death note, pedagogy of the press just fell into your hands and now you write names in it? Is that the idea? Is that what you're trying to tell us? Veganista. Anyway, so, today, so we got a few people in the room. There's some people that I can't see yet. So if you're in and I haven't greeted you, it's not because I don't love you. It's because I just can't see you yet. Your name hasn't popped into the chat. Lychians, Lychians, welcome. So yeah, so we're gonna jump in. Here's what I thought I would do. I think that I'm just gonna talk a little bit about I'm gonna talk a little bit about the content of chapter 4 of Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And then I really want to just open up for discussion. And my sense is over the next few weeks, the content on my YouTube channel is really going to be trying to bring in some of the wrap the theory that we've been discussing over the past month. We're going to try to wrap that theory around some of the conversations that we have been having or some conversations that we've had in the past, but we haven't had a real theory to um, to measure the validity of some of the or the efficacy, I want to say, of some of the themes that have been discussed. For example, in the past, when we discussed the theme of vegan advocacy or vegan activism, and we've just had these real general discussions about it without really having any theory to weigh the efficacy of these things. And now I feel like, having discussed this book, we might have a theory, but we're going to finish chapter 4 and then see how that works. So Veganista, I was in the library. I wasn't even looking for it. It literally just came across my hands. I was somewhat blown away. So you found a copy of Pedagogy of the Oppressed in the library, because they probably burned most of the copies. They probably went through. By the way, I don't know if people know it, but is it Netflix? Netflix is producing a film of Fahrenheit 451. I don't know if folks are familiar. Is it Kurt Vonnegut? I'm not sure who the author is. Actually, I don't think it's Kurt Vonnegut. But Fahrenheit 451, I wish somebody would look it up. The author of Fahrenheit 451, but Fahrenheit 451, it's a novel. It was made into a movie, and the idea is, in the future, all of these books, they burning them. They burning the books, y'all, because they don't want people to have that kind of that level of consciousness. So they're burning the books, and the fire department is responsible for book burning. That is the premise of the book. Ray Bradbury, thank you, Lychians. Thank you. Yeah. Look at all y'all. Look at all you knowledgeable folks out there. Yeah, thank you. And there was a film made, I believe, in the 70s, which is a pretty stunning film for its time. But I'm really excited that they're bringing this to a new generation. In when we have so many discussions about about whew, about what I'm talking about. you know um I'm not going to say it because I'm having one of those moments where the word's not coming to me, but you know what I'm talking about. It's like censorship. Okay, that's the word, censorship. We have so many conversations about censorship, right? If you can't, if I can't post this to, people can post anything, right? People have all of these channels, all of these platforms to say anything they want to say, and there's all these people talking about censorship. If I don't want to watch, if I don't want to watch you, if I block you, that's all censorship, right? Well, Fahrenheit 451, that's going to be about some censorship, y'all. So let me dig in. So I'm going to dive in here and just talk a little bit about chapter 4. And I'm not going to spend that much time. I want to try to get through it quickly, like in like maybe like 5 minutes, just to give you an overview. So we've talked about, so far in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, we've had a discussion of humankind's ontological vocation, which is to be more human, right? And we've talked about the fact that right now there's a distortion of the ontological vocation of human beings, and that distortion is dehumanization. So we see dehumanization. In chapter 2, we have a theory from Paulo Freire about different types of education. We have the banking method, which is an oppressive method that sees the student as an empty vessel that needs to be filled with the information that the oppressor sees fit. And there's a whole system in place to ensure that that information is internalized by the individual so that they become good citizens for the oppressor to control. Then we went into chapter 3. Chapter 3 was far more about the process that Paulo Freire is proposing to develop a education program for the oppressed that is based on an understanding of the thematic use of the oppressed individual. So understanding the thematic verse. I didn't talk so much about Paulo Freire has a theory that that we are in, the thematic epoch that we are in, is based on dominance. So think about that. We live in an era of domination. And so in chapter 4, Paulo Freire takes this idea of domination, which is, I often talk about the dominant cultural mode that we are in, one based on violence, and he holds it up against a, a world of principles based on dialogue, which he sees as the antithesis of domination. Dialogue. And dialogue not only as the antithesis, but the method that will lead us to our own liberation, right? And not only our own liberation, but the liberation of those who seek to oppress and dehumanize. Veganista says, this is Los Angeles. You'd be surprised. We have many books that might be censored elsewhere. Well, that's good to know. All right, so I'm going to dive in really quickly. So Paulo Freire in chapter 4, like she says, there's almost no need to censor books when nobody bothers to read anything difficult. And I think by difficult, you mean challenging in any way. Challenging in any way, right? People read, we read, what is it, manga? You just give me pictures. Just give me a lot of pictures. I don't need any words. Right. Okay. So let me dive in here. So Paulo Freire basically lays out that we have this dichotomy that exists between the, an oppressive dominating mode and the mode of dialogue. And so he calls them the dialogical modes and the anti-dialogical modes, right? So the dialogical mode and the anti-dialogical mode. And he starts in the book with the anti-dialogical modes. And he gives us four components, 4 approaches in the dialogical mode. And the first of those is conquest. I'm just going to give them to you and hope that we can come to a collective understanding. If you have questions, ask those questions. If you're watching this on YouTube, write your questions down in the comment section, and I'll get to your questions as they appear, right? So one of those the forms that this dialogical mode takes on is conquest, right? We can imagine what that means, right? It's what happened here in the United States. It's what happened all over the world. Imperialism, right? Colonialism, right? We can talk about that. War, right? All of those modes. Those are fairly, that's fairly obvious one, right? The next process of the anti-dialogical mode that Paulo Freire talks about is divide and rule. Divide and rule. And again, if you have questions about that, if you want me to get into that, I can get into that in the comments section. We've had a lot of conversations about it, right? In fact, many people in videos talk about divisiveness, and even the divisiveness of just bringing up some of these conversations. When we talk about racism, there are people who call that in and of itself divisiveness, right? Menti the Bear, thank you for becoming a fan and welcome. Hope you're having a great day. So divide and rule as another function, right, that we see in the anti-dialogical mode. Manipulation, right? You can think about that and the forms that it takes. And of course, as we go through these and you're thinking about things that you want to say, if you want to jump in and guest and talk about the particular ways that these things manifest themselves in the world as you see it, we could talk about that too. But manipulation. And the last of these is a slightly more, slightly more complex, but I think they are themes that we see discussed all over YouTube, and that is cultural invasion. Cultural invasion. It's interesting. I'll just read really quickly. Cultural conquest leads to the cultural inauthenticity of those who are invaded. They begin to respond to the values, the standards, and the goals of the invaders. In their passion to dominate, to mold others to their patterns and their way of life, the invaders desire to know how those they have invaded apprehend reality, but only so they can dominate the latter more effectively. Just throwing that out there, right? I'm not going to get too much into them, just throwing these out there. But since that one was maybe a little bit more complex, I thought I'd give you a little of the language that Paulo Freire's to talk about these. And those were the anti-dialogical modes, those are the modes of domination that Paulo Freire talks about, right? And now we're going to talk about this other mode of being, which is present. There are modes that are present, and I think we see them exemplified in the world around us. But we can think about how are these things valued and how are these things talked about. So the first of those in the dialogical mode, remember this is the opposite now. We're in a new place. The first of those is cooperation. When we start to operate in a dialogical mode, we start to see cooperation as opposed to conquest, right? Which we saw in the anti-dialogical mode. The next thing that we see is unity, right? As opposed to divide and rule, we see unity for liberation, or at least that's what Paulo Freire tells us that's what we'll begin to see as a shift in our way of being together. Unity for liberation, right? Then, as opposed to manipulation, in the dialogical mode, we begin to see organization. Organization. And finally, Paulo Freire offers us, in opposition to cultural invasion, cultural synthesis. Cultural synthesis. And so, Kenza Peach, thank you for becoming a fan. Thank you for joining the conversation this morning. So that's it, right? So that's how Paulo Freire finishes out Pedagogy of the Oppressed. He just gives us these two ways of identifying the differences in modes that we might see as we operate in the current cultural dominant mode based on domination, based on anti-dialogue. And then this opposite mode that we see as we move toward a liberated society and we start to operate based on cooperation, based on unity for liberation, based on organization, and based on cultural synthesis. So those are the things that are thrown out. And so I think we can begin to recognize an overall theme that is being presented by Paulo Freire, where we are moving away from our traditional, typical, violent, coercive ways of being together in society and moving towards something that is based on a collective action, dialogue, coming together, finding common ground, finding peace with each other. And I imagine that these things, they can be applied across any issue that one might have in mind. One can see where something like intersectionality, if that's a big word, if that's something like, oh, no, let's not talk about that. But one can see where thinking about finding common grounds, thinking about how there are connections between different forms of oppression, because oppression is coming from one direction, right? We have like the dominant class, a dominant ruling class that are using any method that they can to maintain rule, right? To maintain social rule. And so understanding that, we don't even need to talk about intersectionality, right? And I'm not saying that we have like one villain, right? But basically, we can say that there are individuals that control the resources, and those individuals to hold on to those resources need to hold on to power, and they need to exercise that power in all of the ways that they exercise that power, and that's generally through this, idea of violent conquest, manipulation, divide and rule, and this cultural invasion that we see happening, right? We can talk about that. And so then, as we start to talk about the efficacy of things like our activism, and we can talk even about vegan activism, for example, when we see methods being deployed to raise awareness around veganism, and those methods start to mirror the same violent and dominant modes that we see from the oppressor class, um, is that is that problematic? Does that become problematic? Are we somehow justifying the modes of behavior that have been used to keep individuals dehumanized, right? Submerged in a situation of oppression, right? Subjugated. Um, are we justifying that if we start to use those same modes of behaviors to do it to other people that are doing things that we don't like, right? So, we see people that are treating animals as food and products. And so we use these, we try to conquer those individuals and take away their power and force them to think the way that we think and behave the way that we think. And, we do it we say we're doing it for the greater good, but in some ways, are we simply turning those individuals into objects? And by doing that, are we then justifying, if it's okay to turn individuals into objects, is it okay to turn pretty much anyone into objects, right? I don't know. I don't know. So those are the questions that I'm left with. And I talked way longer than I said I was going to talk. But so from this point forward, I'd really like to know what all of you think. And it's okay if people are like, phew, I can't, that's too much this morning, because we may just have a short session today. Because I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to talk a lot about this. We spent 4 sessions now talking about pedagogy of the oppressed and presenting this theory. So I'd like to know what you think. So what next? Some of you may know, if you've been paying attention, I've been doing some study of macroeconomics, and so I think I'm going to spend some time talking about those. Those will be some of the themes, and upcoming live streams will focus on macroeconomics, and not simply, like, oh no, we're going to be studying economics, but looking at macroeconomics and some of the assumptions that are built into the theories of economics. There are those who believe that somehow economics as a science is neutral, and that the rules of macroeconomics can simply be applied, and they simply run their course, and it's a natural way, a natural order of things. And so those are some of the things that I'm going to be a little bit critical of. So if you are someone who knows about economics and you want to come and you want to challenge that, we may bring some folks that I've had on the channel in the past to who've introduced this idea of economics and told me that I needed to focus more on economics and stop talking about race and all these other things. And when I'm gonna show you how economics has everything to do with race. I'm gonna show you how economics has everything to do with gender. And I've talked about some of these things in the past, but I'm gonna talk about how, for example, how certain skills, even natural skills that human beings demonstrate, are valued very differently in society. Very, very differently in society. And once you apply a value artificially to a skill, you've already manipulated the economy. You've manipulated. You've manipulated things, right? So we don't have fairness. Things don't simply work themselves out because there are constantly people who bring their subjective values to this system, right? To this system. So we're going to talk about those things a lot. And I'm going to teach you some terms so that when you get into conversations about economics, it's not like you're going to know everything that you're going to talk about, but there are things that you can question. You can ask people to question, you can question people on and see and learn a little bit more about where they're coming from and where their bias might be present. Hey, Tom Hall. So Veganista said it divides us, but that methodology might work for others. And I'm not sure. Veganista, be more clear what you're talking about because I was talking a lot and I may have missed the point and things don't pop up right away. So I'm barely awake at this time on a Sunday morning. It's difficult enough. Now you're going to throw macroeconomics at me. No, we're not going to talk about that today. We're not going to talk about that today, but those are things that we're going to talk, and we're going to talk about it in a way so that it's very lay. And when I say lay, that's coming from because I was raised in the Catholic Church, and so lay were things that that you didn't have to be a priest to understand, right? So we're going to do a very popular education approach to macroeconomics. So I hope we're going to make it real simple so that my my 5-year-old niece could understand what we're talking about. Tom Hall says economics is only scary when it's applied to your wallet and called the invisible hand of the marketplace. Right. That's another thing too, is that people talk about economics in terms of finance, and economics and finance are not the same thing. There may be a relationship between economics and finance, but economics, in its simplest form, it's like, how do you get the things that you need to live? That's economics. How do you get the things that you need to live? And either you are getting the things that you need to live and figuring out how to get the things that you need to live, or you're not figuring out how to get the things that you need to live, right? And so, so there's a failure. So we have, we get a failure, right? We have failure when things don't work, right? And that can be on the individual level or it can be on a societal level. So those are some things that, that we're going to get into in the future. I'm going to talk about some movies that I've seen, and then I'm going to go and see this Black Panther movie. I'm not sure how I feel about it, but I feel like I need to go and see it because I'm a sci-fi fan. Y'all know I like the science fiction and the action and stuff like that, and I haven't seen one of these films in a little bit because I've just been disappointed where they've all kind of just been going downhill. So I've been excited about this one, obviously. Um, just hope that doesn't draw in all the cryptocurrency pushers. Right. So, when we talk about like currency, that's just one tool that's been introduced into, the realm of economics, right? It's just a tool. Like the dollar is just a tool, right? All these things are tools. But when we get to Kearney says crypto all the way. I have my own thoughts about that about crypto. I have my own thoughts about crypto. I have my thoughts about that, but we'll get into that as well. Maybe those will be some of the later sessions. But like I said, we're going to start really real basic with some basic definitions, and I'm going to try to share those things with you and see what you all think about them. And I'll also be talking about them on the channel. Veganista says, when these vegans use the tactics, methods of the oppressed, and I think you mean the oppressors, right? Oppressive tactics, right? It's usually by young white vegan males. I'm gonna call you out, Veganista, because I think the main one ain't so white. The main one is the brownest of them all. One of the more offensive, which is why I think that individual is held up in such high esteem, because it's hard to cry out that this person is oppressor when they kind of look a little bit like an oppressed class. But I think that's its own form of racism and bias and all that stuff. But we're gonna get into that stuff. So before we jump off, oh my gosh, I want to tender greens, and they denied my tender, y'all. I went to Tender Greens and they denied your. Oh, please, that's a story that we got to tell. Do you jump on and tell this? Come guest and tell us the story of what happened. And before we go, I mean, I'm like, I didn't want to talk that much today. I actually have a board meeting in a little bit. This is you guys know that I'm on several boards, and it just so happens that two of the boards that I'm on have their meetings, and their meetings tend to be rather long. And I'm an officer on both of those boards, and so they're back to back. So I had one yesterday, and I have one in just a little while. So I am going to jump off as soon as possible. But if there's anybody who wants to guest and say anything, that would be wonderful. And I apologize if anybody is watching for the first time. This live stream is usually an hour, a little bit longer than an hour. It's going to be a little on the short side. It's been a huge undertaking. It was heavy lifting. I was reading this everywhere, y'all. I was reading this on the treadmill. My friend came in, my friend Corbin, who's an organizer in Brooklyn, who I adore. In fact, Corbin is where Corbin is. He used to work at Added Value when I was on the board at Added Value. But he came in and he found me on the treadmill. He took a picture and he was like, "How are you reading Pedagogy of the Oppressed at the gym?" So another thing I want to tell you all about is I've just gotten obsessed with the gym. I've just gotten obsessed. I only want to be at the gym. I only want to be at the gym. And I think it's because I'm in a place now, like when in the winter in Detroit, when it's very isolated, it's hard to get around. Just the winter in general, when there's like nothing to do and nowhere to go, I start to get so bored and so antsy. And there's only so many, there's only so much, I hate to use the phrase, world domination that I can manage on my computer at home. So I have to get out into the world. And so I've been going to the gym. Y'all, I've been spending hours at the gym. I go in the morning, and then when Chris gets home at night, I go at night with Chris. If I start to wither away, if I start to look a little withery, if I start to look a little withered, it's because I've just been spending too much time at the gym. I'll try to take care of myself, try to eat lots of things. So that said, y'all, I adore you all so much, but I got stuff to do. I'm gonna be back next week with lots of stuff. I'm gonna be back next week with lots of stuff. Like I said, we've got the kids already started with their program, and I'm going to be holding these auditions for this new play, so I'm excited about that. Veganista says, "I'm barely awake, but they're not accepting cash anymore. The guy next to me offered to pay for my lunch, but I had my cards. They're not accepting cash. That's so interesting." So you went someplace you've gone someplace to get some food. You're trying to have your breakfast, and they're not taking your money. They're only taking cards. Well, that's, I think, illegal. I think that is actually against the law. I think it's against the law because cash is, like, I think the only legal tender in the United States, and I think that it is supposed to be accepted everywhere. So if they're not accepting cash, they may be breaking the law. But let's look that up. Maybe we'll talk about that. And since we're moving on to economics, let's talk about that. But what's interesting to me is, like, yeah, what does that mean? Does it mean that, like Lycheen says, it looks like they don't trust their workers? Does it mean that they don't trust their workers? And what does that say? Ooh, that's scary. Okay, y'all. So much love to you. I hope that everybody has an amazing day. Thank you guys for joining. I thank you all for joining me for the final brief little section as we finish off with Pedagogy of the Oppressed. We'll probably, bring things back, bring some of these concepts back in the future. But for now, that's it for this brief little live stream. Those watching on YouTube, like this video if you like it, share, comment, subscribe. This is Reg signing off. Love yourselves. Peace. Oh, wait. Veganista says, wait. This better be important. This better be important if it froze my sign off. Make it quick. Make it quick. Come on now. All right. This hand is going to go. Hit me up in private, y'all. Peace out.